Hi, I'm Mike Reynolds, a senior reporter covering the media industry with S&P Global Market Intelligence Tech, Media, and Telecom News Team. Welcome to MediaTalk, a podcast hosted by S&P Global, where the news and research staff explore issues in the ever-evolving media landscape. Today, we're going to engage in another Kagan 2026 preview, this time examining the mobile pay TV and broadband worlds in the U.S. and Europe. I'm joined by three S&P Global Market Intelligence Kagan analysts from different parts of the globe. Mohammed Hamza is the research director for Kagan, where he leads the global fixed and mobile telecoms and consumer technology research team. His primary focus is on Western Europe. How you doing today, Mo?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. Also in the house is senior analyst John Fletcher, who leads the America's research team for broadband, multi-channel video, and mobile towers. He's up in the wilds of California. How's it going, John?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having us.
All right. Lynette Luna is a senior research analyst who leads coverage of U.S. consumer mobile and tower markets. Lynette, how are things out in the Denver area?
They are great. Thank you for having me on here.
Let's start with the mobile watch, Lynette. Elon Musk, Space Exploration Technology Corp's Starlink is looking to become a mobile operator. There's a couple of things maybe that's pointing in that direction.
Yeah, that's the speculation because they bought $17 billion of spectrum. And then Elon Musk likes to be first in lots of markets and throw a lot of money at things to make them happen. And then we also saw that it filed for US trademarks, Starlink Mobile, powered by Starlink, those type of things that cover a wide range of telecom services, including cellular. You know, it already has deals with T-Mobile in the US, Rogers, KDDI, and other carriers across the world to kind of augment the terrestrial mobile services.
So he has the infrastructure in place to do this if he'd like to.
Sort of. I think it's more about enabling the terrestrial part. It's more of a limited market because I think Starlink could really fill a great hole in the US telecom market for rural and outdoor emergency, maritime, aviation, IoT, those type of things, but not in dense urban and building environments. That would require lots of infrastructure to enable that to happen. Mobile terrestrial carriers can't even go deep inside buildings yet. So, and then we also need FCC approval and rule waivers, and they'd have to decide what their business priorities are. They're going public. So when you go public, you can't just do everything you want, right? You have shareholders to answer to.
Okay. So a lot of things have to happen. Do you see something happening this year, or is it maybe it's a 2027 thing?
I think they'll continue to make more agreements. I have kind of a funny story. I was in a convention center and I had no coverage and it asked me if I wanted to connect to satellite. Kind of made me chuckle because there's no way that would happen deep in a concrete building.
Okay. All right. Let's continue here in terms of the U.S. mobile carrier market. Lynette, you've described it as an oligopoly. Again, it's basically T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. But Verizon and T-Mobile have new CEOs, so the market's going to have a bit of a shakeup. I would imagine those guys want to leave their imprint on the market. So can you tell us a little bit about T-Mobile's new CEO, Srini Gopalan?
Yeah, so he's a company veteran and he, I think, will aim to refine the company's Un-carrier strategy. So we've already seen that focusing on digital transformation, especially pushing digital onboarding. It also launched a service where it makes it easy for users of other carriers to add T-Mobile service or become a T-Mobile customer pretty easily on their app. And using AI, all carriers are looking at AI to kind of streamline their businesses, streamline customer interactions, reduce reliance on more physical stores. So I think he'll be really focusing on cost and pushing T-Mobile's leadership even further in terms of coverage and customer base.
Dan Schulman is the new Verizon CEO. What do you think about him? What's he going to do?
So I think he's more tasked with transforming the company from more of a kind of a utility provider to a customer experience focused provider. Verizon has taken a lot of shots for kind of just really continuing the status quo from 4G. It really led in the 4G era because it was aggressive in rolling out its network. So it had the best coverage and it could always offer the highest prices. And that's really not the case in the 5G era. So it needs to become a lot more aggressive, not only on pricing, but just offerings, especially against T-Mobile and AT&T. AT&T's been pretty aggressive too. And like I said, all of them are using AI for kind of personalized marketing and improving customer retention. We saw that the Frontier acquisition closed, so it's going to be really aggressive with Convergence, offering converged offerings. And that's kind of like the way that all three operators are really aggressively competing, because when you have a customer that takes broadband and mobile, the churn goes down, ARPU goes up, and it's easier to start selling even more services to these customers.
Okay. Mo, can you talk about bundling in Europe? How many markets does Kagan follow over there?
Yeah, so we have regional coverage, but in Western Europe, we cover 16 markets in depth, but not all of those markets have data attached to them. So there's 2 points of data. So one is regulator reported data, which we have for about 13 markets out of the 16. And then you have a more limited data set of operator reported data, which, to be honest, it keeps shrinking just as the number of operators report pay TV numbers has shrunk and shrunk over time. That kind of makes things a little bit more difficult in terms of being able to provide a comprehensive analysis, but there's still a bit of a gold mine in there for getting to grips with operators, bundle trends, and the changes that have come about there. In terms of the number of operators, I think we have something like 12 operators in the whole region that actually report data, and there's no harmonization between them. So you'll have one operator reporting ARPU and churn, and another that just reports subscribers, and another that reports bundles across different types. And so you have to kind of bring all that together.
So again, we're talking about fixed telephony, pay TV, mobile, and broadband. Is in a general sense, Mo, can you say in Western Europe, do a lot of people take all four services from one provider?
Yes, up to a point. So we reached peak bundle already in terms of triple play and quad play
Okay.
bundles. And so you have some markets like Portugal where you had like a really high quad play penetration. I think it was like 80-90%.
Really?
And then you have
Okay.
other markets where it's kind of closer to zero for quad play. I think the key things to think about is fixed telephony is essentially disappeared, right? So that's one element of the bundle that naturally is no longer there.
Right.
Pay TV is going the same way, in that people no longer see it as being a kind of a critical part of what they buy. What matters is connectivity. And so the structure of what bundles are has changed. So you see operators now focused on fixed mobile convergence. It's really about mobile broadband and fixed line broadband. And if you can bring those two elements together, you're doing pretty well. But you have to also remember that mobile isn't always a natural fit within bundles, because if you live with other people that aren't part of the family, for instance, you won't necessarily want to share your mobile bill with the rest of the household, right? So there's certain elements that don't always work very well. But certainly, I mean, FMC, fixed mobile convergence, is growing, but quad play, triple play are declining. And so you're seeing a lot more double play, but that double play essentially tends to be more fixed broadband with pay TV or fixed broadband with mobile.
Okay. You had mentioned Portugal, Mo, in terms of having a very high penetration rate here. What about some of the other markets? I think that maybe in the UK and a couple of others, there's been a real decrease on these fronts.
Yeah, there has been. I think there's a bit of fatigue related to how much you sell consumers and what they feel like they're paying for. I mean, you have to put things into economic context, right? The environment has been relatively poor for a number of years. High inflation, high interest rates, cost of borrowing, the pressure on households, especially in Western countries, on consumers and what they can and can't afford these days. Taxes have been going up incessantly and countries are heavily indebted. And so there's, I think, a little bit of a reset in terms of what people are prepared to pay for. And that translates right across the board to how many video apps you pay for and so on and so forth.
Okay. John, let's go to US here. Pay TV universe has been under duress for the past decade. The hour's been pointing down. Give us a sense for where it is. And I do believe, though, the third quarter was an aberration of sorts.
Oh, Mike, I've been covering the downfall of multi-channel video for years. And when I saw the third quarter data, I had to recheck everything. And then I went and did cartwheels and a happy dance. Because I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Third quarter was pretty cool. We actually had growth in multi-channel when you include these virtual providers like YouTube TV and the like. But you got two things going on. You got the virtual providers, it's a seasonal. So third quarter is always really strong thanks to sports. And the virtual guys had the strongest third quarter net adds in history. So you got that going on. you got growth. But then if you look at the traditional cable, satellite, and telco multi-channel business, particularly at the cable operators, about a year ago, the two big guys, Comcast and Charter, did a pivot towards streaming, bundling Netflix with your traditional video service, providing a service that feels like a traditional multi-channel service, but it's technically a virtual service. So they've been pushing their salespeople for the last 4 quarters to once again remind customers about this cool bundle thing they have. And also it includes this whiz-bang thing called streaming video. We're starting to see the fruits of that. And the numbers are still negative. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it was the best of a bad quarter. We're talking about, there's only 500,000 subs of losses in the third quarter for cable. And they were more like 1 million every quarter losing for video. So, and you look at Charter and Comcast, they're kind of leading the way there. And between those two, they're 80% of the cable multi-channel space. So when they make a move one way or the other, the whole space looks like it's going up. You got to hand it to them. They were thinking ahead and being innovative with trying to bundle streaming, and it seems to be improving. And now all eyes are going to be on the fourth quarter.
Okay. John, in particular, YouTube TV. I think the narrative out there, the general perception is that it's going to become the largest video provider. Is that your take?
I would not be surprised at all if that happened in the next few years here. Absolutely. Just looking at YouTube TV and Hulu with live TV, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens.
All right. Mo, let's just jump back across the pond. Can you give us a sense for pay TV in Western Europe? Are we seeing similar things? It's been down forever. Has there been a little light at the tunnel at this point?
It's never been as drastic as the US declines. I think those were hugely unnatural if you compare them to other regions around the world. Most of the regions have held up kind of declines of less than 2%, whereas the US has been 4 or 5 times at least that at times. Europe is very different because we've had bundles and kind of integrated services for a long time. I think Virgin Media in the UK was the first to bring in Netflix as part of its pay TV bundle, integrating it into the set-top box. So every single operator in Europe bundles streaming services with their pay TV. Literally everyone does, and they do multiple apps at that as well. So the decline hasn't been as drastic, but it seems to be stabilizing. And I think that's where in the US also, it seems that it's now kind of stabilizing at a rate that is more aligned with what we're seeing globally.
In terms of streaming, Mo, can you give us a sense? Is it like here in the States? Is it about Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and Paramount Plus? To what extent are those guys big over there? And are there others that maybe don't have that impact in the States that are working in Europe?
Yeah, so it is very similar. Netflix dominates, YouTube dominates. You see news like the BBC is going digital first content on YouTube TV that was just signed. So those platforms are becoming critical. But you have to remember here in Europe, we have a really strong free to air, or what you guys call over the air environment.
Right, okay.
So free content, big public broadcasters that are publicly funded or commercially funded, and not in the pay TV space. Pay TV networks have always been kind of the smaller brother there. So we have a lot of free content, and most of the eyeballs, at least historically, have been on broadcast content. So it's very kind of strong localized content for each country. So there are very big differences between the big countries in Europe that can support a lot of free to air or over the air channels versus the smaller markets that can't host as many, because a smaller population essentially means less advertising money. And so the opportunities in the big markets are very different than the smaller markets. So if you compare France, Germany, UK, Spain, Italy with the likes of Belgium or the Netherlands or somewhere like that, it's vastly different. Small markets have been much more heavily skewed towards pay TV and the transition to streaming services, if you like. But we still have all the same players. We have operators that have created their own virtual pay TV apps where you don't need a set-top box anymore. But I think across the globe, sports is still the foundational factor for pay TV. And I think the minute that goes away, I think pay TV also goes away in its kind of traditional sense, because that's what's held it all together in the past. But as you get companies like DAZN, for instance, taking over more and more rights, and there's less availability and less interest from the operators, frankly, to buy into those services and spend billions on rights when they have their own commitments for 5G, 6G, fiber rollouts, and so on and so forth. So I think their priorities have changed. And I think pay TV now essentially has almost gone full circle in a sense that the streaming services have become the aggregation strategy
Right.
for pay TV operators. Like we used to aggregate TV channels, now we're aggregating OTT services. It's much the same, it just looks different.
I gotcha. One thing that really caught my eye reading some of your articles, it's an offering from Telenor ASA, and you can get 3 streaming services through this platform and you can rotate them out.
Yeah, that's correct. And in most cases, it kind of evens out in terms of what you're paying. But in some cases, a lot of this stuff is experimental. So this StreamX service is essentially pushing some subscribers to pay more than if they'd bought those services individually. But you're kind of paying for something. You're paying for the privilege of swapping services out each month and having a single bill and being able to manage things. As you might have experienced with Disney Plus, if you get Disney Plus via an operator in quite a few markets, you can't go to the operator and cancel that service. You have to call Disney Plus up, and trying to get a number for Disney Plus is not easy. So yeah, there's a lot of experimentation around this stuff because it's really important to be able to help consumers manage these services. It's one of the biggest bugbears around what's going on at the moment. I want to cancel this service and pick up this one, and it's really complicated.
All right, let's switch gears and talk about broadband. John, broadband showed some growth in 25, but it wasn't from the cable guys, as you mentioned, Charter and Comcast, and they've got most of the market.
Yeah, it's not been a good market for cable broadband for the last couple of years. Fixed wireless, as your listeners know, I'm always talking about fixed wireless, and it's not going to stop. Last quarter was record high for net adds for fixed wireless in the US. It's just not slowing down. T-Mobile a couple of years ago came out and said, hey, yeah, I think we've got the low-hanging fruit. Expect us to have net adds under 400,000 per quarter. That didn't happen. People are still doing this. They love it. They're experimenting with it. They're offering great deals for fixed wireless. And so we're just seeing tons of growth there. We're seeing tons of growth with Starlink, which is the LEO broadband option from our friend Elon Musk. Amazon Leo is expected to finally launch this year. So everyone is throwing up thousands of satellites. So I hope you guys are done stargazing because the sky is just going to be full of these digital birds sending us our cat videos from the sky. So that's what the growth story is really right now. And I know you had a question about fiber too. I think the interesting thing with fiber, Lynette mentioned earlier about T-Mobile and the uncarrier strategy. We watched T-Mobile pull the rug out from the legacy wireless operators and everyone had to play catch up. T-Mobile had a couple pretty big acquisitions last year for fiber operators. They're now within the top 10 fiber operators in terms of subscribers, and they're in the top 5 of broadband operators between their fixed wireless operations and their fiber business. So I expect to see some interesting things happening with fiber in the US. They're already acting sassy. They came out with, I believe, it's a 10-year rate lock for fiber service, which is kind of unbelievable. And I think the cable guys are getting ready to respond. You're going to start to see, I don't know if it's going to be a price war or some other way of trying to attract and retain customers, but things are getting interesting in broadband as people are leaving one operator and going to the other. There's definitely that, but there's still about 10% of US households that don't have it. So there is still a base of users that are ripe for a service like a satellite broadband service. A lot of these households are out in the sticks like me. So that's always been the satellite sweet spot, is extremely rural areas. So I'd be curious to see how Amazon Leo markets it. I've heard that they're going to go for the consumer, and I've also heard they're going to go big for enterprises. So we'll just kind of wait to see how they approach the space and what they decide to do.
Lynette, your sensibilities about the broadband market here in the U.S.?
I think that the next wave of mobile growth is actually coming through convergence quite a bit. You have a lot of carriers investing in fiber and using fixed wireless. So I think it'll be an interesting 2026. There'll be a lot of aggressive bundling.
Lynette's absolutely right. The cable operators, they're not always competing on price, but they are throwing phones at customers to keep them and giving them a free year of service with their MVNO service that they have. And just to kind of hang a hat on some numbers for that, Charter and Comcast both had about 17% of their broadband customers also using them for their mobile phone service. Those numbers are now 30 and 40%. So it's grown like crazy in the US. They've done a really good job of bundling mobile services on top of broadband and TV and home security, et cetera. They're really putting the multiple in multiple service offerings.
Okay. About 10% of the U.S. Households do not have broadband. Mo, what about in Europe? Is there a figure there that's commonly thrown about?
No, it varies quite drastically, actually. Some markets are quite a way behind in terms of fiber penetration, but there's a big difference here between Europe and the US, in that in Europe, we have DSL networks that cover 95 to 100% of homes and premises in general. So
I'm jealous, Mo.
connecting the unconnected. We don't have the geographic kind of challenges that you guys have. Like, yeah, we have mountain ranges and things like that, like the Alps, but they're not heavily populated. And I think that it's those pockets where satellite, fixed wireless, and so on will play a role. But you look at France, you look at Spain, they're approaching 100% fiber penetration, which is pretty crazy. And you've got countries that were lagging behind, like the UK, are now approaching 60, 70% penetration. And so the unconnected here in Europe are that last kind of, I'd say 2 to 5% of homes. So we don't have the same kind of environment in terms of the struggle to roll out fiber. And you have to think that the distances are huge in the US, and the scoping of costs plays such a big role. We've had a lot of fiber rollouts, and the cost per home is now sub $500, whereas if you went 5, 6, 7 years ago, it would have been 2, 3, 4 times that.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of improvements in terms of how those networks can be rolled out.
All right, back across the pond here. Lynette, I think over 70% of operators are engaged or about to engage in fixed wireless access. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's the low hanging fruit, right? And they've seen all over the world that it is like the primary 5G use case right now. So it makes sense to do that. The perception of maybe 5G enabled gaming kind of ebbs and flows a little bit, depending, I think, on what company priorities are. But I think confidence in cloud gaming has grown quite a bit, from 40% in 2022 to 64% in 2025. So I think these networks are kind of getting to the point where they can kind of compete with broadband a little bit, or offer slightly different types of services or pricing. And then the connected home is always pretty high on executive priorities.
The other thing, Mo, connected cities, is that something that's happening in Europe?
I mean, it certainly is, and it's happening globally. I think that integration between the satellite operators and the mobile operators or carriers, those integrations are becoming key to connecting devices, connecting farms. There's an interesting example actually just recently from Spain, where essentially every car has to carry like a cone, like a connected triangle, that if you break down, you put it out behind your car, so you're warning other people that you've broken down. But they have IoT connected beacons essentially for all drivers. So that's going to add another 10 million IoT, or at least, devices in that market. I don't think it's always kind of like a sexy topic, because it revolves around managing cities. So it could be connecting traffic lights and managing traffic flows and Amazon delivery bots and all the rest of it. There's a vast range of applications there that are real world, that are happening now, but they're not always the most obvious things, like with these connected beacons in Spain that essentially have to be carried by law.
Interesting.
So that you see a massive jump in machine to machine services all of a sudden because of these things. And that's just going to grow and grow and grow exponentially.
In the US, Mo, connected devices have always kind of had a low monthly ARPU, but a really high margin, like $5 to $10 a month, but the margin's like 50% margin. Is that what you're seeing in Europe, or is it different?
Same everywhere. I think these devices that only connect when they need to send data are highly effective, whether you're on a farm and you need to send the latest prices, or it might update once a day or twice a day or once a week. Those kinds of devices are very beneficial in that sense from a margin perspective. There's a lot of that.
Mo had alluded to 6G earlier. Lynette, do we dare talk about it at this point? Is this something happening now? When we spoke last, I think it's more of toward the end of the decade.
Yeah, I mean, vendors, of course, want to talk about it, right? They want to sell more equipment. And there's always countries around the world that want to be at the forefront of the newest technology. So there is work on developing it. There's work on figuring out what spectrum that it should fit in. It's a lot of AI things that are in there. So it's probably one of the most complex standards that we've ever seen. But I think it is an end of the decade thing in terms of, we'll see pockets here and there.
All right, we're getting to the end here, and I'm going to go to my catchphrase. We've jumped around a lot here. John, what have I jumped over entirely? Something that you're going to be following closely in 2026.
Kind of watching the BEAD funding, where that's going to land. They changed
Okay.
the rules last year. It went from being a beauty contest to the best technology is going to win. Last summer, they said, actually, we're going to give the most cost efficient options going to be probably the one that's going to win, which moved fixed wireless and satellite to the front of the line. So watching to see how that impacts BEAD funding and if the U.S. actually gets its act together and rolls out fiber. I mean, Mo mentioned how awesome Europe is with fiber. The U.S., we're still mostly cable broadband here because of the cable TV explosion in the 80s. We still had that infrastructure sitting there, and they flipped a switch and did broadband. But watching to see how BEAD impacts fiber, fixed wireless, and satellite, I think that's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens with that.
All right. Lynette, what's going to be on your radar?
Yes, I agree with John, especially on the fiber. I think we're going to see actually all three mobile operators be really aggressive with fiber. T-Mobile is actually in my neighborhood and has a building nearby, building fiber networks and partnering. Fixed wireless access is a great tool, but they also realize they need to have fiber as well. And AT&T has been particularly aggressive on that side. Also, just evolution of 5G. We still haven't reached the full potential of 5G. So a lot of carriers are just rolling out standalone 5G, which means it's kind of decoupled from the 4G core network. So it should enable them to do a lot more things like better private networks, network slicing, things like that. And then just heavy competition. I mean, we have an oligopoly, but I don't see the competition slowing down at all. I think Verizon needs to be really aggressive.
Okay. Last words to you, Mo. What are you going to be looking at?
Well, fiber is definitely one of them. I'm not going to expand too much on that because I don't think there's an alternative to fiber in terms of the necessity of having it in the ground for as many homes as you can get to. But I think the most interesting will be how the media environment plays out, because in Europe, we've had a lot of telcos and cable companies selling off their media assets, and those media assets are being consolidated in turn by existing media companies, and they're not always the traditional broadcasters. Some of them have come from kind of newspaper groups or radio groups that want to kind of expand their portfolios. I think this is really interesting because there's similar consolidation going on in the US. So you got DirecTV, AT&T, you've got the Skydance Paramount thing, you've had NBCU spin-off, Warner Bros, Netflix. It's all there. There's a lot of this happening. So existing broadcasters and media companies are they're trying to build a media asset that's more comprehensive, that includes radio and TV and streaming and all the different parts that they need as kind of telcos and cable cos divest from that area. So I expect to see more of that.
That concludes this episode of Media Talk. I just want to thank our Kagan analyst trio of Mo, Lynette, and John for sharing their thoughts on mobile pay, TV, broadband in Europe and the U.S. Appreciate you all being here today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
This is Mike Reynolds. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch up soon on the next installment of Media Talk.